All right, so this is going to be the second section of the Common Assessment tutorial for the 5th of February. And here's going to be a talk aloud based on what we learned about the late 1800s. So, the first question, and I'm just going to go through multiple choice, show you how to use deductive reasoning based on what we learned. So, first question, in the late 1800s, which associations were formed by farmers to help solve their problems? All right, so now while this kind of pops out to me easily, I'm going to take you back to why the answer choices that are incorrect are incorrect. So I'm going to start at the bottom at D. The social gospel movement and the temperance movement. So those weren't two big ideas that I learned about thus far. If I look back, I have the gospel of wealth and I have philanthropy, but I don't have anything about social gospel, though that might be something related to the gospel of wealth. So maybe that, but that had to do with wealthy people and not farmers. The temperance movement, I may not remember what that is, but I do know that this social gospel thing I think had to do with the wealthy, and that didn't have anything to do with farmers. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party, now when we were talking about the associations formed by farmers, these two parties existed prior to the late 1800s, so that happened before, so it's unlikely to be this answer. It's also unlikely to be this answer because those aren't the major organizations that we have been learning about. Now, progressives is something that I remember hearing about in the lesson. Muckrakers, we didn't talk about specifically, so I'm not sure which goes here, so based on that, I'm not sure, but what I do remember is from the 6 things I need to remember about progressives is that they are middle class and urban, and so they definitely aren't the farmers. So what is left for me is the Populist Party and the National Grange. And what I remember is that I said the Populist Party is the Grange plus the Granger movement plus the free silver idea. And they were both made up of farmers in the South and in the West and Midwest. And so based on that, the fact that these are the two organizations that I know were made up of farmers, and the rest of these two, these could have had farmers in them, but they weren't created. That's what formed by would tell us in the late 1800s. They existed before then, so it can't be them. I know this has something to do with the middle or wealthy class. This has to do with the middle class, and both of these are in the cities, so that can't be it. So I'm left with A as my answer, which is the correct answer. Now, this next one requires that I read this map in order to answer the question. What was the main impact of the discoveries shown on this map? Now, so the things that are discoveries are gold, silver, and copper, according to the map. And the gold, silver, and copper are in places like what becomes South Dakota, the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, Arizona. The rest of the map tells me that the things that are darkly shaded are states, and the things that are not are territories. So we have a lot of gold and silver and copper discovered in the West before most of this stuff becomes states. So what is this going to lead me to? Let's start from the top this time. They enriched the American Indians living at these locations. So what I do know about when this time period is going on, and because California is already a state, I know we're in the later part of the 1800s. I also know that the exam is going to cover the later half of the 1800s, so that would only make sense. What we just learned about was that the movement west by the trains is actually going to push American Indians or Native Americans out of their their traditional or their relocated spaces, so probably not going to enrich, which means to make better, their lives. They forced farmers to leave those areas where minerals were discovered. Now, again, what I know from this time period is that farmers are just now moving in to these areas. So the farmers are just now coming into the areas. So it's unlikely, if I already know that farmers are just now moving in, that they're going to be forced to leave. They caused manufacturing centers to move further west. Now, I'm not sure about this one. I'm not sure what a manufacturing center is, but I do know that what we've been talking about is things moving further west. So this seems like it could be a potential answer to me. They attracted large numbers of settlers to these areas. Okay, so that's the other thing that we talked about. So that the West being open leads to more settlement in the West. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of an announcement. I'm recording at school. But so C and D seem like they might be the correct answer to me. And so I'm going to decide that they attracted large number of settlers to these areas. Makes the most sense. And it makes the most sense because, one, I know that more people are settling in the West. And I'm not sure whether a manufacturing center has been built in the West. I know cities are coming, but I don't know if manufacturing centers are. And I know that based on what I learned about the populace wanting to have gold and silver be a part of the currency, that it seems like the fact that these discoveries are happening are going to help those Midwestern and Southern farmers that we talked about, which they are not manufacturing centers. They are settlers. Right, so I'm going to choose settlers, D, as my answer. Okay, so this one's kind of long. First, I'm going to read the question. Which federal law was passed in reaction to the description exerted above? And so that simply means, what is the outcome of the things that are described in this paragraph? There was never the least attention paid to what was cut up for sausage. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust, where workers had trampled and spilled uncounted billions of consumption germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and water from leaky roofs would drip on it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. Okay, I'm gonna stop reading. You guys can read the rest. So this is talking about terrible, filthy conditions for keeping meat. So I'm going to figure out what kind of law would be developed as a response to that. I'm just going to start from the beginning. The 17th Amendment. I don't remember what the 17th Amendment is, but I do know that none of the amendments in the Constitution, sorry again, more announcements. What I do know is that none of the amendments to the Constitution have anything to do with meat. Why do I know that? Because I know that the Constitution is about how government works.
For the interruption, Roxana,
I'm just going to let it go.
Your mom is waiting. Roxana and Julia Herrera, your mom is waiting.
The Federal Reserve Act. I don't know what that is either. So it might still be on the list. The Meat Inspection Act. This seems highly likely because this passage talks about meat a lot in disturbing detail, and this answer choice has something to do with meat. Finally, the Clayton Antitrust Act. Now, I remember antitrust in relationship to the robber barons, because I learned that robber barons had different kinds of monopolies, and trusts were one kind of them, one kind of monopoly that they could have. So I may not know exactly what happened in that act, but I know that antitrust probably has something to do with big business. So I know the 17th Amendment doesn't work because that's an amendment to the Constitution, and the Constitution doesn't care about how dirty, filthy, disgusting the things were happening with this meat. I'm not sure about the Federal Reserve. I'm feeling pretty good about meat inspection, and antitrust I know that I can take off the list. The Meat Inspection Act is going to be the correct answer. Really what you needed to notice is to simply read and see how many times the word meat and something related to meat shows up in this passage. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, ooh, reading this entire thing is making Miss Thomas sick. 5, at least 6 or 7 times it talks about meat. And only one answer choice actually mentions meat. And you might have thought, oh, they're throwing that in to trick me. Nope. Probably the most logical answer is the most logical answer. Okay, and so our final question. These acts demonstrated that progressive leaders, what? Okay, so what are the acts? The Interstate Commerce Act. Okay, so interstate, inter means between states. So between states, commerce is trade. So something to do with how states trade with each other. The Sherman Antitrust Act. Okay, we just talked about antitrust. It's got something to do with big business. Something to do with limiting the power of big business because it's anti the trust, so it has to do with like not liking robber barons. Don't know exactly what it is. The meat inspection, I now know, has something to do with the filthy, rotten conditions that meat was kept in, according to Upton Sinclair. The Pure Food and Drug Act, also something that probably has to do with whether or not food is good. And I guess drugs here probably means medicine. So these acts demonstrated that progressive leaders believe that states, rather than the federal government, should regulate the economy. I cannot prove that. Thought some federal regulation of the economy was necessary to prevent the worst abuses of industrialization. Were prevented from taking more active measures by the U.S. Supreme Court. Favored a socialist approach to in which federal government ran the most important businesses. Okay. So I'm not sure about the states taking more control. It does say something about interstate commerce, so maybe. Thought some federal regulation of the economy was necessary to prevent the worst abuses of industrialization. And so what we learned were the problems of industrialization were unfair or dangerous working conditions, the cramped living, the political machines, and apparently this really nasty meat that no one should have been eating. So it seems like abuses of industrialization, that's like the problems of industrialization. I know at least the antitrust thing gets at that unfair working conditions and like big business being able to have monopoly that we were talking about with the Granger movement and the populist movement. So this may be an answer. We're prevented from taking more active measures by the Supreme Court. So I know that this isn't the answer because if the Supreme Court was involved, we would have had something to do with a court case. And so it would say something versus something. And we don't have anything like that. So it can't be the Supreme Court. Favored a socialist approach in which the federal government ran most of the important businesses. I don't see anything that says anything about the federal government owning anything. The word act simply means that there's a law that's created. It doesn't mean that the government creates some sort of organization to control anything. So that doesn't work. So we are here between believe that states rather than federal government should regulate the economy. Thought some federal regulation of the economy. So the thing that is most keeping with what I've learned thus far, what I remember about the progressive movement is the fact that this talks about abuses of industrialization, and these lead to problems that I learned about. So that's going to be my answer, B.